Welcome to the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery.
Hey everyone, ready to get a little sneaky? We're going deep on a topic that I think secretly fascinates us all, lies. Deception.
It's one of those things, right? It's everywhere.
Yeah.
And we all kind of want to know more about it.
Totally. Whether we're true crime junkies
Right.
or just trying to figure out if that salesperson is being straight with us, there's something about lies that just draws us in.
Yeah, it's a puzzle, figuring it all out.
Definitely. So for this deep dive, we're using Thomas Erikson's Surrounded by Liars as our guide.
Great book.
It really gets into the nitty-gritty of why people lie, how they do it, and how we can get better at spotting those fibs.
And it makes you think, about things you might not have considered before.
Right, like where do we even draw the line between a little white lie and a full-blown deception?
Exactly. Like Erikson starts with that classic definition of lie, right?
Yeah.
A deliberate false statement intended to deceive. But then he throws in these curveballs. Like, what about those toy hospital lies we tell kids? Or those half-truths we tell to avoid hurting someone's feelings?
It's tricky.
It is. When do those cross the line?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would say those little white lies are harmless, even necessary sometimes.
Right.
But Erikson, he makes you think twice.
He does.
He really challenges us to examine those gray areas.
Makes you wonder how often we might be bending the truth without even realizing it.
Totally. So, okay, we've established that defining a lie can be more complex than we initially thought.
It's a slippery slope sometimes.
It is, but why do people lie in the first place? Is it always about being malicious?
Not necessarily. I mean, think about it. Sometimes we lie to protect someone's feelings.
Right.
Like telling a friend their new haircut looks fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Even if secretly we're thinking, oh, I know.
We've all been there.
We have. But then there are those lies that are more about self-preservation.
Right.
Like Erikson talks about this job applicant who lies about their software expertise. Ooh. Just to land that dream job. Maybe they figure they can learn on the job, but is that really ethical?
That's a tough one.
It is. It really makes you think about the potential consequences.
Yeah, it's like that saying, oh, what a tangled web we weave when first we practice to deceive.
Right.
Because even a little lie can snowball into something much bigger.
Absolutely. And Erikson really drives that point home about the impact of lies.
Yeah.
Not just on the person being lied to, but on the liar themselves.
It's like there's this inner tension, a cognitive dissonance they have to deal with.
Exactly. Because they're holding on to the truth and the lie at the same time.
Yeah. It's like living a double life, in a way.
It can be incredibly stressful, and over time, it can even distort a person's perception of reality.
So it's clear that lying can have these ripple effects, impacting individuals and relationships.
Definitely.
But what about the bigger picture? How does all this lying affect society as a whole?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Think about fake news, manipulated statistics. These are forms of deception with massive consequences.
Right. It's like, how can we even know what to believe anymore?
That's the key question.
Yeah.
And that's something we're going to explore more as we look at how to spot deception and become more discerning with the information we consume.
And speaking of deception, Erikson has these fascinating case studies in the book, like Anna Sorokin.
Oh, the fake heiress.
Yeah. How did she manage to con New York's elite out of thousands of dollars? It seems unbelievable.
It really is remarkable.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a combination of audacity, meticulous planning, and a deep understanding of how to manipulate people.
Wow.
She created this elaborate persona, claimed to have millions, dropped names of influential people, and always stayed one step ahead.
So she was a master manipulator.
Absolutely.
This is why it's so important to do your research, even if someone seems incredibly successful.
You can't just take things at face value, especially when money's involved.
All right, let's move on to another example of deception in the digital age.
Okay.
Erikson talks about Caroline Calloway, the influencer, whose carefully crafted online life kind of fell apart.
Oh, yeah.
What can we learn from her story?
Well, I think it highlights how blurry the lines between truth and fiction have become online.
Right.
It's so easy to present this perfect version of ourselves.
And she built a huge following doing just that.
She did. But when inconsistencies emerged and people started accusing her of exaggerating or fabricating parts of her life, the illusion crumbled.
It makes you wonder how much of what we see online is actually real.
It's like, do we need to develop a filter or something to sift through all the noise?
Right. How do we separate the genuine from the fake, especially when it comes to these influencers?
Well, it's crucial to remember that social media is often a highlight reel.
Okay.
It's curated. People are presenting the best versions of themselves.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean everyone is lying, but we need to be skeptical.
don't compare our lives to these unattainable online ideals.
Exactly. And that brings us back to Erikson's emphasis on critical thinking.
Yeah.
We need to question our sources, look beyond the surface, and not accept everything we see at face value.
It's like we're constantly swimming in this sea of information.
Well, you are.
And it's getting harder and harder to tell what's real.
Which is why these critical thinking skills are so important.
So how do we develop those skills? What can we do to become better lie detectors?
Well, Erikson has some practical tips, and that's what we're going to dig into next.
Awesome. I can't wait.
Let's start with one of Erikson's techniques, observing inconsistencies.
Okay.
Those little details that don't quite add up in someone's story.
Like that friend who's always late but has a different excuse every time.
Precisely. Now, it's not foolproof. Sometimes people just have bad memories.
Yeah, that's true.
But it can be a good starting point.
So what's another technique we can use?
Well, Erikson talks about strategic questioning.
Oh, okay.
It's about gently probing for more information, not just accepting vague answers.
Right. So instead of just passively listening, we can dig a little deeper.
Exactly. And see if their story holds up under scrutiny.
And he also mentions observing emotional cues, right?
Yes. Things like changes in voice tone, microexpressions, even nervous fidgeting.
But aren't those kind of subjective? What if someone's just having a bad day?
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Relying solely on those cues can be risky. They can be misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Someone might fidget because they're uncomfortable with the topic, not because they're lying.
Right.
That's why Erikson stresses that these cues are just one piece of the puzzle.
So what's the most important tool then?
Intuition.
You mean that gut feeling that something's off?
Exactly. That sense of unease.
Oh, yeah. We've all felt that.
Like something doesn't match up between their words and their demeanor.
It's like a little alarm bell going off in your head.
Right. And it's important not to ignore those feelings.
So trust our gut, but also verify.
Exactly. Find that balance between intuition and critical thinking.
Now, before we move on, I want to touch on another type of deception that's everywhere these days.
Okay.
Social media bots.
Oh, those things.
Yeah, these accounts pretending to be real people.
Right. But they're actually programmed to spread certain messages or manipulate conversations.
It's like artificial popularity.
It is, and it's incredibly effective at making certain viewpoints seem more popular than they really are.
It's another way truth gets distorted online.
Absolutely.
It's exhausting trying to figure out what's real and what's not.
It can be, but that's why developing these critical thinking skills is so essential.
Okay, so let's talk about those skills.
We need to be able to question our sources, look beyond the surface, and not accept everything at face value.
And Erikson actually uses the DISC model to explain how different personality types approach lying.
He does. It's fascinating.
I've heard of DISC, but could you give us a quick refresher?
Sure. DISC stands for dominance, influence, steadiness, and conscientiousness.
Right.
It's a model for understanding behavioral patterns, and Erikson applies it to lying.
Okay, so how does that work?
Well, imagine you're on a project, deadline's looming, and you have a D-type colleague, someone who's very dominant-driven.
Okay.
They might lie about their progress to avoid looking incompetent.
To stay in control.
Exactly. On the other hand, a C-type, who's very conscientious, detail-oriented,
Right.
they'd probably be meticulously honest about their progress, even if it means admitting they're behind.
That's a great example. It shows how different personalities deal with these situations.
It does, and then you have the I-types.
The influencers.
Yes, the social butterflies.
Right.
They might lie to gain approval,
Yeah.
or the center of attention, or just smooth over social situations.
There's,
And then S-types, the steady, reliable ones.
okay.
They generally value honesty, but they might lie to avoid conflict or to protect someone.
It's like a whole new way of understanding people's behavior.
It is.
Mhm.
And while it doesn't excuse lying, it helps us see the motivations behind it.
I love that.
It's about developing a more nuanced perspective.
Totally. Wow, we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive.
We have. We've gone from defining a lie to exploring the motives to even touching on how personality plays a role.
It's been fascinating.
But we've only just scratched the surface.
Oh, there's more.
Much more. Next time, we'll delve deeper into the world of infamous liars.
Okay.
And those devastating consequences of their deceptions.
Can't wait.
We'll also get into those practical tips for spotting deception and how to confront a liar with empathy and intelligence.
This is going to be good. So if you're intrigued by the psychology of lying, stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into the world of lies.
It's going to be a captivating journey into the heart of human behavior.
I'm ready for it.
Me too.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the world of lies. It's amazing how, once you start thinking about deception, you see it everywhere.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder how much we're all being lied to on a daily basis.
It's a bit unnerving, right?
It is, but it's also kind of fascinating, trying to figure out the motives and the methods.
It's like we're all amateur detectives now.
In a way, yeah. We're all trying to unravel those little mysteries of human behavior.
So let's talk about some of those bigger mysteries, those not-so-harmless forms of lying. Last time, we briefly mentioned a few infamous liars.
Right.
But I'm really eager to dig deeper into their stories.
Me too. It's like, how do they pull it off for so long?
Exactly. Let's start with Simon Leviev, the Tinder swindler.
Oh, his story is just wild.
I know. It's like something out of a movie.
It is. It's unbelievable that he was able to con so many women out of millions of dollars.
And the way he did it, it was so calculated.
It was all about emotional manipulation, preying on their vulnerabilities.
Playing the victim, creating these elaborate stories of danger and intrigue.
Exactly. He knew how to push those buttons, make them feel like they were helping him escape these dangerous situations.
It was all a lie.
All a facade.
And the damage he inflicted, it was devastating, both emotionally and financially.
It's a stark reminder to be cautious, especially with online dating.
Yeah, you want to be open to new connections.
Of course.
But you also have to protect yourself.
Absolutely. And that's where those critical thinking skills come into play.
So how do we spot those red flags, especially in those early stages of a relationship?
Well, it's tricky because everyone's trying to put their best foot forward.
Right.
But you can look for inconsistencies in their stories.
Like, do the details change each time they tell it?
Exactly.
Do their actions match their words?
Yes, and trust your gut. If something feels off, don't ignore it.
It's like we have to be on guard even when we're trying to be open and vulnerable.
It's a delicate balance, but it's important to protect yourself.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about another type of deception.
Okay.
Lying with statistics.
Ah, yes. Numbers can be very deceptive.
They can. It's so easy to manipulate data and mislead people.
It is, and Erikson gives some really compelling examples in the book.
But, like, I'm guilty of this too.
Yeah.
Just accepting statistics at face value.
Especially when they're presented in a visually appealing way.
Exactly. Like those infographics you see all over social media.
Yeah. We're drawn to information that's easy to digest.
And if it confirms our biases, even better.
Right. But we need to be more critical.
So what are some of the tricks we should watch out for?
Well, one common technique is truncating the y-axis on a graph.
Okay.
Manipulating the scale to make small changes seem much bigger.
Sneaky.
It is. And then there's confusing correlation with causation.
Oh, right. Just because two things happen at the same time doesn't mean one caused the other.
Exactly. Remember that classic example about ice cream sales and shark attacks?
Yeah, both go up in the summer, but one doesn't cause the other.
And then there's cherry-picking data.
What's that?
Basically selecting only the statistics that support your argument.
And ignoring the ones that don't.
Precisely.
It's like a magic trick.
It is. It's all about misdirection.
So how do we avoid falling for these statistical traps?
Be skeptical. Question everything.
Examine the source, the methodology.
Right. Look for potential biases.
Don't just blindly accept anything at face value.
Exactly. It's like we need to become data detectives.
I love that. We need to be on the lookout for clues that reveal manipulation or bias.
Precisely. And this all comes back to critical thinking.
It's so important.
It is. We have to be able to sift through the noise and figure out what's credible.
It can be overwhelming, though, all this information coming at us from all directions.
It is. But that's why developing these critical thinking skills is so crucial.
They help us navigate the world with more awareness.
And make more informed decisions.
So how do we actually cultivate those skills? Are there specific things we can do?
There are. And that's exactly what we'll explore in the final part of our deep dive.
I can't wait. We'll equip you with the tools to become a champion of truth in a world full of deception.
That's the goal. We'll delve into Erikson's practical advice on how to strengthen those critical thinking muscles.
Awesome. And I think we could all use a little more truth in our lives these days.
I agree.
All right, welcome back to our final deep dive into the world of lies.
I feel like we've been through a lot,
Yeah. Motives, consequences, those infamous liars, those statistics.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
But now I'm thinking, okay, what do we do with all this information? How do we actually become more resilient to deception?
That's the key question, right? How do we protect ourselves?
Yeah, and I think Erikson makes a good point that knowledge is power.
Definitely. The more we understand about how lying works,
Right.
the better we are at spotting it.
So it's less about being suspicious of everyone
Right.
and more about being informed.
Exactly, having those critical thinking skills to cut through the noise.
So let's talk about those skills. Like, how do we actually strengthen them?
Well, Erikson gives us some techniques, and one of the most basic but important is considering the source.
Right. Not all information is created equal.
Exactly. Like, is this coming from a trusted news organization, a scientific journal, or just someone ranting on social media?
Yeah, gotta check that credibility.
And even if the source seems credible, we can't just blindly accept what they're saying.
Okay, so what else do we do?
Look for evidence. Are there facts backing up their claims?
Or just a bunch of fancy words and emotional appeals.
Exactly, like those political ads that promise the world but don't offer any real solutions.
So we need to become fact checkers.
In a way, yeah, always looking for that supporting evidence.
And what about our own biases? How do we keep those from clouding our judgment?
First, admit we have them, right? We all do.
Okay, and then...
Try to get outside our echo chambers.
Yeah.
Seek out diverse perspectives, even ones we might disagree with.
Oh, that can be hard.
It can, but it's so important for developing a balanced view.
It's like we have to be willing to be uncomfortable sometimes.
To grow, yeah.
And what about that emotional component of information?
Oh, that's huge. How does something make us feel?
Right, like if we're feeling angry or scared,
We might not be thinking clearly,
yeah, we might just accept anything that fits our existing beliefs.
even if it's totally false.
So take a breath, check those emotions, and then think critically.
Exactly. Don't let those feelings run the show.
Okay, this is all great advice for spotting deception in general, but what about when we need to confront someone directly?
Ooh, that's a tough one.
It is, especially if it's someone we care about.
Yeah, but Erikson has some good tips for navigating those conversations.
Like what?
Well, focus on the impact of the lie, not on accusing them.
So not like, you liar.
Right, more like, I felt hurt when I found out.
It's about how their actions affected you.
Exactly. And remember, there might be a reason behind the lie.
Okay.
Fear, pressure, trying to protect someone. If you understand their motive, it might help.
But sometimes, even if you understand, the relationship might be too damaged.
That's true, and that's when setting boundaries becomes important.
You mean walking away?
Sometimes, yeah, we have to protect ourselves.
We have the right to expect honesty.
Absolutely.
And if that's not there, we can choose to distance ourselves.
It's about knowing your worth.
Wow, this whole deep dive has been eye-opening.
It's a lot to take in, all this talk of lies and deception.
But it's so important, to be aware of this stuff.
It is. It's about living with more intention, more awareness.
Yeah, and ultimately, choosing truth.
In our own lives and in the world around us.
That's a great way to put it, choosing truth, and hopefully building a world where honesty and integrity prevail.
I think we can all strive for that.
Absolutely. So, thank you for joining us on this journey into the world of lies. We hope you learned something, and maybe, just maybe, you're feeling a little more empowered to navigate a world where deception, let's face it, it's everywhere.
It is, but now we have the tools to see it more clearly.
Exactly. So let's use them. And that's our deep dive for today. Thanks for listening.
See you next time on the Facilitators Deep Dive Podcast, your podcast on your way to facilitation mastery. Until next time.
See you then.